The Earth is a fine place worth fighting for, which is why the 5th of June was declared the World Environment Day by the United Nations in order to encourage awareness and action for the protection of the environment. Hence, we here at BEEZ are determined in taking the first steps to reimagine, recreate, and restore. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shanali Ranasinghe from BEEZ, and I will be your moderator for the day. First of all, a warm welcome to the head of the Department of Zoology and Environment Sciences, Senior Professor Preeti Udaganna, Senior Treasurer and Advisor of BEEZ, Professor Inoka Pereira, and to all the academic staff members with us here today. Next, I warmly welcome our guest speaker for today, Professor Devaka Weerakoon from the Department of Zoology and Environment Sciences of the Faculty of Science, University of Colombo. And last but not least, greetings to the enthusiastic audience gathered here with us today at the special lecture organized by BEEZ in celebration of the World Environment Day. For those that are joining with us for the very first time today, BEEZ, in short for the Base for Enthusiasts in Environmental Sciences and Zoology, is the official organization affiliated to the Department of Zoology and Environment Sciences of the Faculty of Science, University of Colombo. So without further ado, let us move on with the proceedings of the session. If not now, when should we start caring about nature? Why don't we start today and be the change? On that thought, we have organized this interactive session on ecosystem restoration, which is the theme for this year's Environment Day. We hope to elaborate and explain what ecosystem restoration is, why it is needed, how it can be done, and the way in which it could be applied to Sri Lanka. So if any queries or curiosities rise up during the lecture, please be kind enough to direct those to us in the Q&A session, which will be held towards the end of today's session. So do send them to me through the chat box and I will make sure to direct them to sir. So I will first of all start off with an introduction of our guest speaker today. Professor Devaka Weerakoon graduated from the University of Colombo in 1985 with a major in zoology. He received a Fulbright scholarship in 1988 to study in the USA, where he completed his MSc and PhD at Illinois State University. In 1995, he returned to University of Colombo and currently holds the post of Professor in Zoology and Environment Sciences. Professor Devaka's main research interest is on conservation of threatened species in Sri Lanka. He has also worked on wetland ecology and wetland management for nearly a decade. He has served as a technical advisor on fauna for the Red Listing Program of Sri Lanka from 1996 to date. And he is also a technical advisor to the Ministry of Environment on conservation of threatened species in Sri Lanka. Professor Weerakoon has also served as a consultant on biodiversity to IUCN Asian Regional Office as well as IUCN Sri Lanka. Sir, we are extremely privileged to have you with us here today conducting this session in celebration of the World Environment Day. I now warmly welcome you to enlighten us with your wisdom. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shanali. Good afternoon to all of you. We are celebrating the World Environment Day under the theme restoration, ecosystem restoration. So like she said, what I will try to do is walk you through some of the concepts of ecosystem restoration and also try to showcase some of the work we are doing and the work we have to do in order to make a difference in terms of changing this planet to a more desirable. So since we are talking about ecosystem restoration, I think first I thought I should give a brief definition of what an ecosystem is. There are many definitions to ecosystems. I chose this definition uh, that is an ecosystem is a complex system that arise due to interaction between living and non-living components that occupy a given space at a given time. The reason why I am saying space and time because ecosystems can undergo change over space and time. Now, if you compare these two, this is a rainforest like Sinharaja, and you can find a paddy field ecosystem right next to it. But when you look at these two systems, this system is fairly stable. It undergoes very little change over time. But if you look at this system, it changes cyclically. Farmer comes, prepares the land, sows seeds, and then it starts growing and then it starts bearing. So the farmer harvests it, and then again the cycle continues. And as the cycle continues, you will find that the species assemblage will also change during the time when the farmer starts tilling the land. As the farmer turns the soil, you will get a lot of insect or worm-eating birds like this gathering around the farmer. This kind of scenery is very common in Sri Lanka. But when the paddy starts growing, the assemblage will change. Different species might frequent the paddy field during this time to feed on various uh, uh, animals and plants that occupy the habitat. And when the paddy field reaches its uh, stage where it starts bearing, you will find the assemblage will change into more seed-eating birds like munias, pigeons, parrots, and so on. So the point I'm trying to make is like if we define ecosystem as an interaction between uh, living and non-living that occupies a space. In an ecosystem like this, the living component undergoes dynamic change and therefore the interactions change. But this is what makes ecosystems so interesting. But if you look at a more mature ecosystem like this rainforest, it arises due to a very long process called ecological succession, which takes hundreds to thousands to millions of years, where it will start from a very simple bare rock and slowly progress towards this stage. So the point I'm trying to make is ecosystems undergo change. Undergo cyclic change. Some undergo rapid change. If you look at transition between these early stages, will be very rapid. But when it comes to the final stage, which we refer to as a climax stage, still things will change, but at a very, very slow rate. But ecosystems are undergoing change all the time. Also, they change in space. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka again, if you go down to the southwestern quarter, you have things like rainforest. And when we go to the mountain area, we have grasslands or mountain forest. When you go up to the northern area, you have this kind of sand dune uh, dominated by scrub kind of habitats. Then we have lots of lagoons and estuaries around the country where you get a lot of coastal habitats like uh, mangroves, salt marshes, mudflats, and even offshore habitats like seagrass beds and coral reefs. Then in the dry zone, you get mainly scrub forest. And if you look at areas like this or in these northern areas, we have dry mixed evergreen forest. But the point I'm trying to make is depending on which area you are looking at, there is a spatial distribution of ecosystems. Ecosystems vary with space because with space, physical conditions change, such as weather patterns, rainfall, soil types, so that different areas support different ecosystems. And this diverse array of ecosystems is what makes Sri Lanka such a rich island in terms of biodiversity. But also we have to understand that the spatial distribution can also change because if you look at now, this is the climatic map of Sri Lanka, and this is the predicted climatic map of Sri Lanka. And you can see the intermediate zone is predicted to undergo a significant change. And therefore, this is the existing forest cover. This might change in the future uh, in a way that we still do not understand. But we can assume that if the climate zones are going to change, the spatial distribution will also change. So the spatial distribution itself is not a constant. That may also change with when we change various parameters. So ecosystems are systems that are undergoing dynamic change in time and space, and these changes can be driven by natural processes or anthropogenic drivers, like things that we do, which changes the environment, which can have an impact on how these ecosystems behave. But ecosystems are very important, and it's important for us to have a diverse area of ecosystems because they provide us many things, many goods and services, which are collectively referred to as ecosystem services. They provide us things like food, medicine, timber, etc. They are valuable in terms of culture because they give us inspiration. There are places where we go for cultural worship, like Peak Wilderness or Sripada. So there are lots of cultural values associated with it. They provide us supporting services like pollinating the flowers, dispersing seeds, etc. And they regulate things. They regulate water cycles, they regulate carbon cycle, they regulate the quality of water. So they are performing large number of services. Some of them we feel because we directly consume this. Some of these services we only feel when the service is no longer there, when the service, when the ecosystem becomes degraded and fails to provide these services. So, but having a diverse array of ecosystems is very important because this way we can also get a diverse array of services which will support other biodiversity as well as us, our livelihoods, our health, our safety. A lot of this depends on having functional, healthy ecosystems. So the ability of an ecosystem to provide these services depend on ecosystem health. Like we have our health, ecosystems can also they also have, we can define the health of an ecosystem. So if you look at the organization of things on this planet, there is a hierarchical organization starting from atoms to molecules to organelles to produce individuals. Individuals produce populations, populations produce communities, communities produce ecosystems and all the way to the biosphere. So if you take an individual, the individual is an individual comprised of a complex set of systems. And failure in any one of these systems will make the person sick or unhealthy. For instance, if the heart doesn't function properly, that will lead to an unhealthy condition. Or if the GI tract doesn't function properly, that will be conditioned as an unhealthy situation. So when these complex systems fail to work, an individual becomes sick. Likewise, if you look at the ecosystem, it is made out of complex system of things, populations, communities interacting with the non-living world, and any change in these systems can make an ecosystem unhealthy. So basically, ecosystem health is defined by three factors. One is vigor, how productive that ecosystem is. If it is very productive, then it can support a larger biomass, a large diversity of species. And if the system is very productive, we can have a very complex organization. If you compare these three systems, this is a forest, a grassland, and a plantation. You can see compared to these two, this has a very complex structure, and therefore it can support a very complex array of species. And the more complex the system is, it is more resilient. It can withstand change because it can absorb fair amount of external damage and come back. I think the best example I have seen of the resilience of ecosystems is just soon after tsunami. Tsunami destroyed many of our coastal ecosystems, but before we recovered from tsunami, I saw many of the ecosystems have already started recovering because they have a lot of resilience, and if we maintain their them in healthy condition, even if they face a serious threat, they can come back, they can withstand that. So that is what we refer to as ecosystem health. Now, ecosystem health and human health has a very strong connectivity because the ecosystems, if they can provide their services properly, then uh, our health and security is also assured. I have taken a very simple example to illustrate my point. Now, if you look at these two figures here, here you have a stream where the watershed is covered with a forest, and here you see the same stream with the forest removed. So when there is rain, the rain will fall on the trees and it will slowly percolate into the ground, and it will slowly flow over the ground where much of the water will be absorbed and replenish the groundwater, and also the forest floor will absorb fair amount of water. So of the rainwater that is reaching the forest, not all the water will flow into the river. Therefore, the river flow doesn't increase rapidly with rain, but uh, when the when the rain is not there, this water that has been stored in the forest floor can be released continuously, so the stream can continue to flow even during dry periods. Whereas if you remove this forest cover, if you make this ecosystem, if you degrade this ecosystem, the rainwater will fall directly on the ground. It will dislodge the soil, it will erode the soil, and the soil and water will quickly flow into the river because there's nothing stopping the flow of water. So the groundwater doesn't get replenished. All the water ends up in the river, and a large volume of water coming into the river results in massive floods. And when we know there's a flood, right now we are experiencing floods like this, people die, people get injured, and immediately in the aftermath of the flood, we get all kinds of diseases. Waterborne vectors will increase, and also waterborne diseases like diarrhea, dysentery. These things can also go up. So basically, by maintaining a healthy ecosystem, we can ensure our health is also uh, preserved and our safety is preserved. But if we destroy the ecosystem, that will eventually have a direct and indirect impact on us. So this is the fundamental concept uh, under which we try to maintain healthy ecosystems, because keeping healthy ecosystems or keeping ecosystems healthy will also ensure that we will continue to get good benefits out of these healthy ecosystems. But having said that, we see that across the world, a lot of ecosystems are being degraded. So what do we mean by degradation? Now, any given ecosystem has an ideal state, has ideal structure and composition, which makes that ecosystem function at optimum level. So if you look at terrestrial ecosystem like a forest or a home garden, by having this very complex vertical three-dimensional structural complexity helps the forest to support large number of species. So if you uh, simulate that in our home gardens by having variety of different trees which grows to different heights, we can again replicate this structural complexity in our home gardens. The much talked about Canadian home gardens are a best model to show that how a home garden can simulate or can be made very similar to uh, a forest in terms of structural complexity, which supports a lot of species. So the composition also becomes very complex. Uh, it also applies to aquatic ecosystems. But unlike in terrestrial ecosystem where the complexity is vertical, we see that in most of the aquatic systems, the complexity is horizontal, especially in shallow systems. If you take a stream like this, if you walk along this stream, you will find this area is a ponding area, and here you have a torrent, and further up you will have rock-covered areas or slow rippling areas. So there can be a number of different microhabitats spread on a horizontal axis. the more microhabitats that are there, the more diversity of things that you have in the stream allow a diverse array of organisms to occupy it. So if you study the stream, you will find what you have in the banks are different from what is in this pool, and what you have here on these rocks in this torrent are very different, because it creates different lifestyles within this uh, ecosystem, which makes it such a rich ecosystem. So any change in this structure uh, that will, any deviation from this ideal state is what we can refer to as a form of degradation. So basically, when you look at ecosystems, they are built over time by a process called succession. So the succession will start from a very simple beginning. It will build a very complex ecosystem, whether it be a forest, or whether it be a tank ecosystem, or whether it's a reservoir. All these things are slowly built up over time, and it reaches a very steady, complex state, which is the climax state possible for that ecosystem. But this can be pushed back due to a variety of reasons, uh, away from that ideal situation, which is what we refer to as degradation. It can be, if it's a forest, it can be due to removal of trees, which will make the complexity less, or forest fires, or maybe even removal of an apex predator. There is a classic video out there in the YouTube about uh, the introduction of wolves into Yellowstone. If you have some time, you should look at it. That when the wolves were removed, how the ecosystem changed, and how reintroduction brought back that ecosystem into its ideal state. So sometimes we don't have to remove trees. Sometimes removal of a major predator can result in expansion of herbivores, overgrazing, and changing the ecosystem. So many things can change ecosystem. Many things can push it from this ideal state into degraded states. And degradation has various levels. You can push it deeper and deeper, all the way up to here, which is complete destruction of the system. And in restoration, what we try to do is push it back into the ideal state. So pushing it into degradation is easy. Pushing it back to ideal state is very hard. I will share with you a case study later on, just to show you how hard it is to restore a degraded habitat. So basically, the way to restore an ecosystem is, there are many approaches to do that. It depends, the type of approach you use depends on the level of degradation. For instance, if you take this forest, it can be partially degraded or fully destroyed. So depending on where you are, this is the healthy state, this is the destroyed state. There can be a number of scenarios in between. Depending on where you are, how you approach it is different. It's just like how you treat human beings. If you go to a doctor, and if you have a mild health issue, you will be asked to take a rest. Take few days of rest and you will recover on your own. But if the situation is a little worse, then they will give you some medication. Or if it is even worse, you may have to get hospitalized. And if it is even worse, you will have to go to an ICU. So that depends on the level of degradation. Likewise, if the ecosystem is only slightly degraded, if you remove the threat, that is enough for the ecosystem to recover, because they are resilient systems. However, if you push it further and further into the destroyed state, we may have to do more and more to get it back into the healthy situation. So there are things called assisted regeneration, where we will not only remove the threat, we will selectively introduce trees into this system that can speed up its recovery into the healthy state. Removal of invasive species. There are a number of things you can do to push it back to the steady state. But if it is completely destroyed, then you have to start reforesting that site, and it will take hundreds of years, sometimes maybe even more, for this to go back to this situation. So this is the same principle that apply to a coral reef or a stream. because right now I think we are having a serious issue in our oceans because of the the ship that got stranded in the Western Ocean. So if you take a whole healthy ecosystem like a coral reef, when you have this kind of destruction, things can go and deposit on the reef, which will result in the beginning of the degradation. And if it continues, it can go to a complete destroyed state. So if it is this level, by removing the debris and cleaning up the system and allowing the coral to recover might be enough. Sometimes we may have to start replanting a little, but when it comes to this stage, you have to do a lot to get it back to this stage. Same thing with the stream ecosystem. If you destroy the watershed, the stream will dry, and if the watershed is completely destroyed, the stream will undergo wet-dry fluctuations. So to restore this, you'll have to do a lot of watershed work around here to bring it back to this stage. So this is basically what we are talking about in restoration of ecosystems. We first try to understand what has resulted in the ecosystem to undergo degradation. So we'll first have to treat that problem, whatever, whether it's deforestation or whether it is releasing some kind of a pollutant into an aquatic ecosystem. So whatever that is causing the degradation has to be first treated, and then we may have to do additional work to push it back to the ideal state that we desire it to be. So I thought I would share with you a actual real life example, a case study, a project that I was involved with for the last 5 years, just to give you some idea about how one goes about doing it. So this study, this restoration project was actually undertaken in a very important forest reserve that is found in the southern part of Sri Lanka, in the Gold district near Hiniduma. Uh, this is the Kanneliya Conservation Forest. Now, Kanneliya Conservation Forest, before it was declared, was logged for timber, as well as the boundary has been encroached by people for shifting cultivation and so on. But once uh, the forest has been declared as a conservation forest, much of these activities came to a stop, but it left behind areas around the boundary of this conservation forest in a state like this. What you can see here, you can see this small picture. I'm sorry if the quality is not good, but this is forest. These dark areas are forest, but you have this kind of open patches. And if you go close, you will find that these patches are covered by a pioneer fern called Cacilla or Draconopteris linearis. Now this Cacilla grows, and during dry season it catches fire. So it goes between growth and fire. You can see this whole area has been destroyed by fire because during the dry season, Cacilla can easily catch fire. And this continuous cycle of fire and growth prevents these areas to go back to forest. So it slows down the succession process, and therefore for many, many years, it remains like this. And to make matters worse, you have large herbivores like this, like Samba, living in this forest, who comes out and start feeding on the plants that are sprouting. So they further slow down the succession process. So we selected this site to pilot test whether we can convert a site like this into a natural forest like what you have out here. So we started in 2016. The first decision we had to make is the habitat was something like this, covered with Kakila, whether to establish a forest plantation like eucalyptus or whatever, a monocrop type of plantation, or go to this option, which is to convert this land into a forest. Now, this is easy because you only have to plant one type of tree. You see a lot of these plantations around Sri Lanka. And when we went to the site, we also discovered that there has been two attempts to plant eucalyptus on this site. Both attempts have failed. So we realized that we have some serious work to do. So the first thing we did was we started developing a plan as to how we should go about restoring this site, what type of things has to be done. So the benchmark was the forest next, right, sitting right next to it. What we wanted to do is take a piece of degraded land like this and convert it into a forest that is similar that is representative of the area. So the first thing we did was we established a few study plots in the forest and try to record what are the trees that are there, what are the trees that contribute to different levels, what are the trees that make up the canopy, sub-canopy, emergent layer, the undergrowth, and so on. So we listed the species, their densities, and so on. And then we prepared a plan to plant this site with those trees in roughly in those ratios. So the expectation was when the trees grow up, it will convert this site into a forest like this. It is easier said than done, but that was our plan. So the first thing we did was we hired a site manager. We in 2017 we developed the restoration plan, and in 2018 we got funding from 10 private sector organizations. So this project is done as a public-private partnership. On one hand, you have private sector organizations who funded the project. The forest department provided the land. Biodiversity Sri Lanka came in as the coordinator, and the technical work was done by IUCN, and I was the team leader of the technical team. So I had an opportunity to get involved with this project heavily. So the first thing we did was we hired this gentleman here, Chitra Sekara. He was very experienced in Kanneliya. If there is Martin Maya in Sinhala, the Chitra Sekara was an icon in Kanneliya, and he just retired. So we quickly grabbed him and made him the site manager. So the first thing we had to do was to build a fence around it to keep the samba away. This took us quite a long time because it's a large area and we had to put up a very long fence around it. And then we started clearing the kakilla along contour lines, and our plan was to go in and plant trees in the cleared areas. So we needed lots of plants, so we also established uh, uh, a nursery. And also we started introducing a lot of soil conservation work in the area, because when you clear the site, the next problem we face is soil erosion. We established a small research station so that we can stay and work there. And we started planting. So we first went with some cover crops like very easily growing pioneers like candor, Gaduba gliricidia, and so on. And our plan was under the cover crop to go in with forest species. So we first went with the cover crop, and when they started growing, we followed with pioneer forest species. Uh, and also, uh, this went on for about a year, and we began to see that we had two challenges. One is, even though we built the fence, the samba somehow kept jumping into the site and eating the growing plants. And we just had a continuous battle, so we had to keep on improving our fence, but samba kept on challenging us. But what was more disheartening was that the trees were not growing. They started getting stunted. So we got a team from Peradeniya to come and do a soil study. And what they told us is that the cacula seems to have an inhibitory effect on growth. This is something that you see in plants, the allelopathic effect. It was not known up until that time. So we were uh, asked, maybe we have to change our strategy. So we changed our strategy. We cleared large areas. We didn't want to do this first because of the soil erosion issue. But since the plants were not growing, we had no option, but we went for major clearing with some soil conservation measures. We started digging up bigger holes and replenish it with organic fertilizer and started planting. And then we also built enclosures within it to protect it from small herbivores during the early growth stage. And immediately we saw that things started changing. The tree started growing, and within about a year, we had very good growth taking place on the site. So the point I'm trying to make is we wanted to, what we had is a situation like this. The succession was blocked at this point where this would not allow the succession to take place because of continuous fire cycles. So we wanted to jumpstart this process. So we started clearing and planting, and we got up to about here after 3 years of hard work and 5 years of 2 years of planning and 3 years of work on the ground. And we are also monitoring this process constantly to see what kind of species colonize, because our expectation is we know what is in the forest, and what we want to see is with respect to that is our benchmark. One day, if this species composition reached that, then we had achieved our success. I do not know whether I will live long enough to see that, but I think we are slowly on our way towards that goal. So we are constantly monitoring this, recording things. So we have a record of what we have done, so that if we want to, the idea is to pilot this and upscale it to lots of such areas around Kanneliya Conservation Forest. But you would recognize that to convert it to degraded state probably would have taken maybe few days to few weeks. But getting it back takes years and years of hard work and lots of money. So this degradation is easy, restoration is very hard. That is the lesson I learned. But it is something that is inevitable. We have to do this because we have degraded ecosystems around the world, including Sri Lanka, in a significant way. So basically, ecosystem restoration is assisting degraded, damaged, or destroyed ecosystem to recover back to their original state. This is not only limited to forests. It can be done with terrestrial or aquatic ecosystems. It can be done with natural or man-made. Even man-made ecosystems, like the home garden I showed you earlier, has an ideal state. So we should constantly strive to achieve that ideal state for any given ecosystem that we have, irrespective of whether they are natural or man-made, terrestrial or aquatic. But what is more important is when we talk about restoration, sometimes people think, well, if we can restore ecosystems, uh, we don't have to worry about degradation, which is a very erroneous way of interpreting it. I've seen this sort of statements are being made whenever there's a development project. If we have to cut down a forest, we say, oh, we'll reforest the same amount somewhere. But reforesting takes years, and it is not a solution for destruction of forests, or it is not an excuse for destroying forests, because like I said, destroying is easy, restoring is very hard. It takes a lot of time, lot of money, and lot of dedicated people to work around the clock to get it back on track. So I think what we should be thinking about is our primary objective should be restoration is important, but we must prevent further degradation of ecosystems. We must try to conserve what we have first and restore on top of that. And also, we must change our ways and prevent further degradation, because if you look at ecosystem degradation, we are the drivers. If we don't manage our solid waste, uh, we we just put it out in front of our house, but the tractor that comes and collects it goes and dumps it in a wetland, which destroys the wetland. So if you generate solid waste in your house, too much of it, then it will result in destruction of ecosystems down the road, which you may not be doing yourself, but you are assisting in that process. If we overuse electricity, that means we'll have to generate more. That means we will have to establish reservoirs, wind farms, or whatever thing which will require to clear a natural ecosystem. If we do not use our water effectively, again the same situation. So I think we must also understand our role in this, because what we do at home can contribute to degradation down the road. So it is important for us to understand the links, because one of the most important things in ecology is to understand the links. Sometimes things are not very clear. You may not think that you are contributing to it, but indirectly we are. So unless we understand those links and try to change our ways, we will contribute to ecosystem degradation. So the point I'm trying to make is, yes, we have to restore, but first we must try to prevent degradation, change our ways so that we can slow down degradation and preserve what we have. And on top of that, we should try to restore some of the degraded ecosystems so that we can continue to benefit from it. Now, this is why this decade, 2021 to 2030, have been declared as the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So this year, although the theme is ecosystem restoration for this year, the theme has been selected also to showcase that the beginning of this decade and the goal of UN is to promote uh, ecosystem restoration over 350 million hectares of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Now, this is a challenging task. It will require a lot of time, lot of commitment, and already 70 countries have committed to this, and they have estimated that if we do this, the the benefits that we can accrue from this activity is US 9 trillion. That's a massive sum. So this is the justification that has been put forward to support this process. And it will also remove 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gas. So it will help us to deal with the current crisis we are facing with respect to climate change. However, if we do not act now, our challenges will become even worse. And eventually, this will have an impact on our food security, the human health, human security, and also it will have a very devastating effect on the planet. So we all have a role to play. As individuals, like I said, we can make a conscious effort to change our consumption patterns. And also in our home gardens, we can change our home gardens into more eco-friendly, plant trees that attract pollinators, plant trees that support butterflies, birds, and so on. There are things that we can do even in a small home garden that can support urban biodiversity. But at an institutional level, we all have to do some work at some point of time. We can directly engage in ecosystem restoration as societies, as organizations, or as business entities. We can provide funding, like the example I've shown you. 10 private sector organizations have come forward to provide the funds for us to do it. But what is most important is when we do development planning, we have to ensure that environment is part of our planning, because we lose about 7,000 hectares of forest annually due to development. This is a massive number. So uh, even if when we look at our restoration efforts, they are nowhere close to this number. So we are destroying faster than we are restoring. So I think we have to think about how we can do development in a sustainable manner, because development is needed. There is no way that we can stop development, but how do we make development sustainable? How do we bring different kinds of paradigm shifts in how we plan our cities, how we plan our development projects, and how we engage in this process by doing restoration. But what I see also is a classic dichotomy between commitment and practice. Because in 2015, our government pledged to increase our forest cover by 2% in according to the Paris Agreement. Uh, this required uh, uh, reforesting 130,000 hectares, which is a significant job to do. But last year, November, there was a circular issued by the present government which repealed two existing circulars, 5 2001 to 2006. I think many of you may have heard of this. There has been a lot of debate about it. 2001 was a circular issued to bring all existing forest land under Forest Department, and 2006 was issued subsequently to release some of the degraded areas for development. So we had a mechanism to release areas for development. However, this circular will make both of these circulars ineffective and will release areas that are defined as residual forest for deep development. Now, it has been estimated, these are all very crude estimates, but according to the available estimates, this would result in the loss of about 300,000 hectares of forest. So instead of increasing our forest cover by 2% as we have pledged globally, locally we are going to destroy 5% of our forest cover. So there is a classic dichotomy between what we are saying we are doing and what we are actually doing. So we need to rethink about this. Because if we continue to degrade ecosystems, it will have an effect on our way of life. So we need development, but we need to make it sustainable. I think all citizens of this country must try to strive to achieve that goal. I think if we all try hard, we can do it. It's doable, but it will require a lot of commitment and a lot of hard work. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I would like to thank BEEZ for asking me to, inviting me to come and talk to you. And I would like to thank all of you for being there. And I would like to ask you to consider if these arguments I presented are logical and reasonable. Perhaps you can also start doing something about uh, for ecosystem restoration during the coming decade. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, sir, for that very interesting yet informative session. And I'm sure our audience might also have some questions by now with the increased curiosity. So now we will be moving on to the Q&A session, and it is time for you to speak up and ask sir any questions you might have had. Are there any questions? If you do have any questions, it's time for you to ask them now. So in case you cannot speak right now, you also can send any queries you might have had during the session through the chat box so that I can direct them to sir. Are there any questions anyone would like to ask?
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. I'm Ashwin, sir. So I have a question, sir. How bad did the marine ecosystem got affected because of the express disaster, and how can we restore it?
Um, at the moment, I don't know because when something like this happens, the first thing that has to be done is damage assessment. It's a fairly lengthy process where you have to look at the affected area, different ecosystems, what is the damage, what is the level of damage, because that is what will inform us what uh, steps has to be taken. So generally, when we have a disaster like this, an oil spill or this kind of hazard spill, the first things that will have to be done before the damage assessment is to uh, uh, treat people, clean. Like if it's an oil spill, then there are lots of animals covered with oil, which is still possible because I think the ship is still not stabilized. But we do not know what the impact of the chemicals that was carried in that fish. We do have some specimens being washed out, but I think NEPA is doing the damage assessment. Only after they have done it, we will know the full impact of this. at that point, we will have to first, like even the coral beds, if there is debris deposited, the first step is to remove that, clean that, and reduce the pressure on the system, and then monitor the system and see if it is recovering or whether we need to assist the recovery process. Uh, Now, since this is a man-made disaster, we may have to, but when the tsunami happened, we didn't assist because it was a natural disaster. So how you deal with a natural disaster versus a man-made disaster is different. So I think it'll take a little time for us to really figure out what is the full damage that was caused by this debacle, and it is still not over yet the way I see it, because if the oil starts spilling, we will have a secondary problem of how to deal with that oil and how that oil will impact our ecosystems. But to give you a simple answer to your question, I think the assessments are being done. Only when these are completed, we will know what the damage is. But what bothers me is like now, when you have a situation like this, uh, the next step would be once we do the damage assessment, we can start claiming. It's also not easy to claim insurance money because there are a lot of legal things involved, but we can claim for direct damages to livelihoods because this has also affected the fisheries sector, the tourism sector. Fortunately, we don't have tourists at the moment, but it will affect, it has affected those coastal hotels and so on. So we have to calculate it and we have to ask that money. But most of the time, what I've seen is even when we get money, very little goes into the ecosystem work. They will pay compensation to people. They will, you know, do all that work, but very little of that money percolates down to doing some restoration work. So I hope this time, because this is perhaps the biggest disaster that had happened in our ocean during recent times, that things will be different, and most of the restoration work needed will also receive money from the compensation we receive. So that is the hope I have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Ashwin, for directing that question to us. Sir, we also have some questions in the chat box, so I hope it's okay if I read them out to you.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, sir. One question says, what kind of techniques were used to maintain genetic diversity in the plants that were used for the project?
We of course didn't have now to screen for genetic diversity. It's a fairly involved process. So what we did was we collected seeds from a broader area within the forest, and expecting that would give us a sample of a more diverse genetic representation. But to be honest, we didn't do any genetic screening of the nurseries because we didn't have the kind of money to do that. It can be done, but we really, even this work is costing us about 1 million per hectare, which is a fairly significant sum. So if we put in the genetic work into it, that will be even more. So we are going without genetic diversity studies. We are basing it mostly on visual observed diversity and trying to strategize so that we capture the genetic diversity by selecting a wide array of seeds for our nurseries.
Thank you, sir. And Shania, I hope that answered your question. Sir, I have another question for you. And the question says, if we need to restore some freshwater fish species in a paddy cultivation area, what are the possibilities that we can start that at a small scale?
Um, Restoring now the paddy has a certain assemblage of fish, and we see that most of the paddy fields don't have the species they used to support. I grew up near paddy fields, so I spend a lot of time looking at them. And now I see, like in most paddy fields, we don't have the kind of species that I have seen. It could be a variety of reasons, but perhaps the most pressing reason is heavy use of pesticide would probably affect their reproductive outcome. And also, there are all sorts of other things that are happening which degrades the ecosystem now. Bellanguilla was used as a dumping yard by the Hevela Mount Lavinia Municipal Council, and the leachate destroyed the water quality. So there could be multitude of things that are operating on it. So if you want to restore it back, one of the things we'll have to do is control the use of chemicals, uh, because that will have an effect on these species. And we can maybe start reintroducing some of the species that were there. But uh, what I also find interesting is in 2015, we did a survey in Colombo wetlands, and we found that still there is a lot of diversity in those wetlands. So there are a lot of positives that we have to take into consideration. But the way we are managing those wetlands around Colombo sometimes is detrimental, because we go and dredge them, we do serious changes that can have an effect. And also in many of these wetlands, I think another issue is the spread of invasive alien fish, like the tank cleaner. Now in Colombo, we have manea, or the clown knifefish, and also tilapia. So all these things outcompete a lot of our native species. So we will have to, on one side, control the invasives, and then maybe reduce the pesticides, because just keep introducing species won't help. It's like putting water into a bucket with a hole. Unless you address the root causes, you cannot restore. So the first step in restoration is addressing the threat, and then go with additional measures to improve the system.
Thank you, sir, and I hope that answered your question, Supun. Sir, we have another question, and it says, what factors should we be focusing on when a major scale restoration process is undertaken? What sort of measures can be taken to minimize the effect on existing species in a habitat without succession?
I think if I understand correctly, if the succession is stalled, what can we do? Basically, I mean, that's the same problem we had in Kanneliya. The succession was stalled due to fire and overgrazing. So the first thing we did was to establish fire bells to stop it, and then the fence to prevent the entry of grazers into the site. But this another site may be very different. So the drivers that operate on different spaces are different. So the first thing you would do in any restoration, large scale restoration project, is first you have to see what has resulted in degradation, and then try to address those. You have to have a plan to address those. Then secondly, you have to have a plan as to how you are going to achieve, because we can't convert a degraded land directly to a forest. We can't go with forest species. First you have to have a cover crop, and then you have to go with but what we generally do is we identify the ideal state. What are the trees that should be there? From that we can select which ones have pioneering characters. So we go with them first, but under a cover crop. And then when those trees start growing, we remove the cover crop and go with more later stage plants. So we have to have a time plan. When do we go with, at first, what are the trees we are going to put on the ground? What do we do in the second year, third year, so on. So it requires a fair bit of planning. For this project, we ended up spending about a year to develop the plan, because there is a lot of studies, baseline studies, and then we had a lot of discussions with people, and then only we came up with the plan. And even that plan, when we implement, we find there are lots of glitches. So we continuously monitor, look what's working for us and what's not, and coming up with adaptive solutions. So it takes many years for us to fine tune it, but once you get it going, it's easy. Once you have the protocol developed, it's like any other thing. You just continue. You can upscale it, but developing the protocol takes time, and it's location specific.
Thank you so much, sir. So there's another question, and it asks about the status of the restoration and conservation of the Bandulapitiya at Galapitamale.
Okay. That was a project that was a very project that's very close to my heart because I think we got involved with that in 2003. One of my graduate students, we just finished a red listing and we realized that bandula is critically endangered. And in 2003, one of my grad students wanted to go and work on it. So she went and did a census and we discovered that there were only about 100 fish there. So after that, we started first documenting the ecology and the biology of the fish, which took us about 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And then we developed a recovery plan. And it took a few more years for us to get the funding to start working. And we also established a local project because the species was inhabiting a site that is completely outside the protected area network. So we had to work with local communities. So we established community groups. We did a lot of awareness. We built calendars. We practically trying to imprint the idea in them that this is your duty to protect this. But after about 5 years, we saw that the population was recovering. Uh, Within like about 2017, 2018, it has reached 1,600. So that was a good recovery from 100 individuals to almost 16-fold increment. And we also managed to establish two other populations because this was only found in Galapitamada in one location. So that is very dangerous. If that stream dries out, that would be the end of it. So we established two populations in a nearby forest reserve. That also took us some time because we had to test lots of streams for suitability. But eventually we found a good stream and that population has also started establishing. Within few months, we introduced 20. It recovered to about 60, 70 individuals. So at that point, uh, our engagement stopped. So we try to transfer it back to the community, but we have to go back in about 10 years and see what has happened because one cannot stay with the conservation project forever because there are other projects. So the idea is to get it started, develop it, and then uh, transfer it to uh, the local community or the responsible agency and then start a new project. So that's how Bandula project went. But I'm fairly happy the way it turned out. I think it's fairly safe at the moment.
Thank you, sir. Now, moving on to the next question.
Kanneliya, yes, can I ask a question from sir?
Yes, sure.
Devaka sir, thank you for that excellent session. I have a small question though. So my question is like in these kind of restoration projects or during a disaster like the ship accidents, lots of false information circulate among public, especially via social media. So can you explain a bit about the impacts of such publicity and the responsibility of public to prevent circulating such false information?
Yeah, I think this is very difficult to control suddenly because Facebook is not something that people can control. But I think it's also important that when this is about personal responsibility. If I get an email before I forward it, I must read it and make sure that it's something that I want to forward. Whereas I see a lot of people just they get things, they just forward it very irresponsible in a very irresponsible manner. So it snowballs into a lot of false information. But at the same time, I think in a situation like this, it is the duty of the responsible line agencies to come and tell people what is happening. Even if things are bad, I think hiding that facts from people might not help. It's like, trying to live in denial. But whatever said and done, the eventual restoration work, all that has to be done by whatever the line agencies like MIPA, NARA, Department of Wildlife Conservation, all those agencies who have the mandate to do it. But as scientists, we have a role to play because since we have a lot of theoretical knowledge on these aspects, which may be lacking in some of those line agencies. We have to work with them. We have to support them as much as possible to develop those plans. And as citizens, I think we can engage because there are a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think to answer your question, I don't know how to stop social media. And I also should like to point out that we should not get information from social media because half the things that are there are not uh, accurate. Uh, the unfortunate thing is we don't have an alternative either. I mean, if we have a site where we can go and get accurate information, this situation won't arise. So for people who are thirsty to know about what's happening, they have no pathway to get that information, which is a situation I think has to be corrected. Like when Ratu Paswala happened, we still don't know what happened there. So I think the responsible line agencies have the responsibility to tell actually what happened, what is the situation. They may not be able to tell everything because they're also still learning about it. But I think whatever we know, if we share it on a website or something which people can trust, I think we can avoid this kind of misunderstanding because sometimes, bad publicity leads to bad kind of response, which is detrimental to conservation because sometimes people do things which doesn't help conservation. So they do it with good intention, but I think at the end of the day, we find a lot of those things eventually doesn't help in the long run. So that's why I think we have to have also NGOs which are responsible, uh, NGOs who can spearhead this kind of activity in a responsible manner. We all have a responsibility as citizens, as NGOs, as state agencies to tell the people what happened and what we are going to do about it, and engage people as much as possible in whichever the way possible to put things back in the right order. So that is what matters at the end of the day. We can criticize people, we can, put nasty posts, but that's not going to bring back the ocean ecosystem. It will require us to do some serious work there to bring it back.
Thank you so much.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sir, are there any actions taken to save Sri Lanka's leopard population by authorities?
Can you please repeat that question? I didn't get the last part.
Are there any actions taken to save Sri Lanka's leopard population?
Leopard population. Yes. Um, there are some ongoing activities. We've seen last year was a particularly bad year. We had an increased number of leopards dying. But what we also realize is these are not leopard directed attacks. All these nooses are set to catch other animals. So what we have to control is wildlife, this illegal hunting of wildlife. So there's some work being done in most of the deaths were recorded in the mountain areas, in estate areas. So Department of Wildlife Conservation and these plantation companies. And there is a non-governmental organization working on leopards. They are doing some very good work in those areas to create awareness, try to control this illegal hunting, and they're also trying to establish a corridor for the first time for leopards in Kanneliya area, so that they can move freely without coming into human use areas, which is what causes conflict. So there are some ongoing initiatives in the country, but these can be further upscaled in order to address the issue effectively. So there are some plans also, a couple of projects in the pipeline, which might uh, add a few more corridors in the mountain area so that you can reduce the conflicting events that are taking place. So to answer your question, there are things going on the ground to address this issue.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. I also have received another question from the audience, and it says that that person has seen a program that you have to discard. My bad. That you have to sink discarded buses and boats in the sea in order to promote fish breeding. So, could you explain this scenario?
That has been tried out, dumping old railway carriages. In fact, INSI Cement has, not INSI, Tokyo Cement has a program where the whatever leftover concrete in these places where when they are doing concrete floors, they are producing concrete slabs which they are dumping in the ocean. The idea is to create habitat, substrates where corals can deposit, or structures that are similar to reefs with the places where the fish can hide, reproduce, that sort of thing. It's been done in many places around the world, but you have to first see whether you are doing it in the right way and in the right place. Because sometimes I've seen any all people think a lot of these can be done anywhere. Now, a lot of times I've seen people try to grow mangroves in mud flats. Mud flats are supposed to remain as mud flats, not they should not be converted to mangroves. So even though people go and try to do things with good intention, if there isn't enough technical knowledge behind it, it can lead to very detrimental outcomes. So uh, to answer your question, yes, that sort of thing can be done. It has been done in many places. But again, it has to be done in a planned, careful manner so that we get maximum conservation outcomes out of such an effort.
Thank you, sir. And there's another question from us, and this is about now during development projects that are conducted throughout the country, natural ecosystems are very often disturbed. So losing even a very tiny amount of ecosystem would be a massive loss from the nature's perspective. So, sir, do you have any advice or thoughts on as to how to restore the ecosystem after the implementation of such development projects?
Um, Generally, I think according to the environmental law in this country, they have to do what is called an environmental impact assessment. And then large-scale development projects also have, based on the identified problems, they have environment management plans. And some of them have even they go beyond and do wildlife management plans. To give you an example, there's a canal project taking place in northwestern province right now, and they have put like $8 million for restoration work, like to restore the destroyed forest, to create habitat elsewhere, to compensate for habitat loss. But these are new developments. Up until about 2 years ago, we didn't think about that, or at least these wildlife management plans for development projects. I was involved in the Morgahakanda Kaluganga wildlife management plan development that was about 6, 7 years ago. Up until then, we didn't have that kind of approach. But I'm very happy to see at least we are now developing plans, but those plans are not being implemented to our full satisfaction. But at least we have taken a step in the right direction. So we have to go one step at a time. So now what we have to do is push those agencies to really implement it and show that you can do development in a sustainable manner. But that is the way forward. Uh, and also all these areas where they are using temporarily, they have to restore. So some of these are mandatory things, but people don't follow it up. That's why I think, that's why I said people who are doing development, these are not done by politicians. Development is managed by highly educated people, engineers, scientists. They are the ones who plan it, they are the ones who implement it. So they must understand their responsibility. If you are building a road, your job is not just to build a road, you have to build it sustainably. You have to ensure that you don't generate dust, that after you do the road, you restore the habitat. I don't see that thinking in our educated people, not everybody, but in most cases. So there is money for that sort of work because most projects come with that. But unfortunately, a lot of times people just ignore that part of the work and they try to save money always on the environment, which is a sad thing. That's what I learned during my life. Whenever you want to save money, you save by cutting out the environment work. But that is what is most critical for the sustainability of the project. But we have to bring that understanding. We have to convert the unconverted. Most of the time, we are preaching to the converted. People who come to this kind of presentations are people who care. But I think we have to get to those people who consider these things as their cardinal duty and change their mindset so that when they do development, they do all these things that should also be part of that project. If you are building a road to have crossings for animals so you don't have road kills, the things like that, simple things can be done. There are simple solutions. If you consult the right people at the right time, it can be done very easily. Yet, a lot of times when they come to us, it's too late, or the solutions that are required are very expensive. So we have to, I think, make this change in the development theater to create awareness among development planners that we have to change the way we do development. We have to be more concerned about environment because that is the only way we can accrue the true benefits of development investment. So that mindset change has to come. It's coming slowly.
Thank you so much, sir. So there's another question from the audience. And it says, how is the trend of involvement and interest in young researchers into these kind of restoration processes and restoration programs at the moment in Sri Lanka? She wants to know whether younger professionals are more interested in this field.
I can see, I mean, most of the time these works are done by old people like us, so coming to the end of our career. But I've seen over the years a lot of young people getting interested and involved in these processes, which is very promising. But I think we need more because I see as of late there is, because when we were students like you, we had only one option, zoology. But now there are other options, molecular biology, things that are more, looks very lucrative because getting into the field and getting all soiled up is not some people's idea uh, of a profession. So you need to have passion and liking to do this. So I'm hoping that more and more young people will get interested in this kind of work and continue to get engaged because we need to have a continuum. Uh, Things should go from strength to strength, so more people getting involved will uh, get better, get things better. But I also see a lot of interest among young people. I remain very positive about this. I remain very hopeful, and I hope the future is brighter for us in terms of having more young people getting involved in it.
Thank you, sir. So now this question is actually more directed towards the ocean. So now we all know of the ocean as a very prominent part of our ecosystem that greatly influences our life. But however, unfortunately, many oil spills have occurred in the ocean on multiple locations around the world. So after such large disasters had taken place, can you let us know, sir, of how the ocean can be restored and what kind of strategies are available to recover from such destructions?
Um, Generally, I think now for Sri Lanka, about 15 years ago, we developed what is called an oil spill contingency plan. Because if you look at our Western Ocean, large number of ship activity takes place. So oil spill was a disaster waiting to happen. Fortunately, we haven't had a major spill. We had about 3 or 4 during the last 15 to 20 years. Uh, the first thing that we plan for is to prevent spills, because prevention is always better. Restoration is very hard. And the second thing is containment. We The oil spill contingency plan was there so that we have the necessary equipment. When you have a disaster like that, you can cordon off that area and try to contain the damage to a smaller area. Now, in this case, it didn't happen. We didn't have the kind of equipment to contain the problem. You can see it spreading from maybe Tangol all the way up to Maravilla Putlam, which is I think is not acceptable, because that we should be prepared for things like that. We should have the right kind of equipment, or else we should have collaborations with. Now our neighbor India is much more powerful country than us. They have much better facilities. So at least we have to have some arrangement when we have something like this to contain, because then it's a smaller area that you have to deal with. But when you can't contain, you have massive scale damage, and restoring will take sometimes years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. We don't know how this will affect the fish populations, how many have died, whether they will recover, whether some have gone extinct completely, because we still can't send divers into the ocean. It's still not safe to do a proper investigation. So I think at least this should open up our eyes, and we should get the right kind of equipment to handle situations like this, because it's much easier to invest on that, which will be a very lower investment, versus the investment that is needed to recover this massive damage. So like we just had a shipwreck few months back, so I think that should have given us the indication that these kind of things are going to happen more often, and that we should be prepared. So preparedness is very important, because preparedness will help us to contain problems, avoid, contain, and then only we should go for restoration. I'm not sure what is the level of restoration required, but I'm guessing is it will take us close to a decade to overcome these problems. A lot of work will have to be done, and whether work means money, whether the money is there, because if the money is not there, nothing will get done. So whether the government will commit money, whether we will get enough compensation, and whether enough money is channeled into restoration work, all this remains to be answered in the future.
Thank you so much, sir, for your advice. And there's another question from the audience, and she wants to know if there is a proper solution for the elephant attacks that happens in Sri Lanka in order to save both human and the elephant population.
Um, it's a very complex problem, but there are solutions. I think even last year there was a committee appointed by the government, headed by Dr. Prithviraj Fernando, who is very accomplished elephant researcher, perhaps the most accomplished elephant researcher on Asian elephants, who lives in Sri Lanka and who has worked for more than 2 decades on elephants. I was one of his colleagues. I worked for about 10 years. So he knows a lot. And we have come up with many plans. In fact, I think I myself was involved in developing 3 plans. Uh, but unfortunately, none of these are fully implemented. They ask for plans, they ask for solutions, and there are reasonable solutions. There are short-term solutions, long-term solutions, but these are fairly involved things because the elephant-human conflict affects 2/3 of the country. So that means we need a gigantic effort to combat it. And nobody has that kind of political commitment to do that. So people are looking for silver bullets. People are looking for small solutions to which is not there. If it was there, we would have done it. The question is, well, what we see is number of elephants dying have increased by about 50%. Number of people are dying more, and the conflict is getting worse, even though we've been spending fair amount of money, which shows that our investments are wrong. So I think to answer the question, yes, there are solutions. We cannot bring it down to zero, but we can reduce it tremendously. There are ways to do that. But the problem is, again, the thing, commitment and practice. People say they are going to solve it, but they don't really do what is needed to solve it.
Right, thank you so much, sir. And Damsan, I hope that answered your question. Sir, there's another question from the audience, and it asks whether, in order to follow eco-friendly development, whether there are any major techniques that are being used in other countries that have not been implemented in Sri Lanka as of yet.
Yeah, but the thing is, a lot of these solutions are location specific. There are things that are done in Europe which we can't do because the settings are different, the context is different. We have to come up with our own ways of doing it because we are a tropical country. We have different ecosystems, we have different biodiversity. But there are lots of things that have been done also. So I think we shouldn't think that everything is lost. There are a lot of people who are doing eco-friendly work. Eco-friendly in the sense, try to see whether your development can be done with minimum damage to the environment and also go a step beyond and enhance the environment so that it will be a positive thing. So we talk about eco-friendly development or eco-based solutions. A lot of these are being talked about. These are not things that I've heard over the last few years. So I think generally what I've learned in my life is first people talk about it, then do a little bit of it, and then if you see good results, people follow models. So even the fact that people are talking about it is good because which means maybe down the road some people are going to try it and show us some good results. So the tendency is there. There are initiatives along those lines. I think we just have to step up and do more because the issue I see is we are not doing enough. We're doing stuff, but not enough to make a significant contribution.
Thank you, sir. And I'm moving on to our final question, I think, from the audience. And I think sir also addressed this during the lecture as well. So, but anyways, I'll read it out loud. And it says that, how can we contribute to ecosystem restoration on a small scale from the space of our homes?
Yeah, I think I spoke about it, but
Yes.
I said anyway, by planning our home garden. Now, if you go to Rajagiriya, you'll see there's the big high-rise building but every house, the balcony has some tree. So it's sort of like a green garden. So I think sometimes we think we live in a small space, that there's not enough for us to really engage, which is not correct. We can, even in a small garden, you can make a difference. Put a few trees that promote butterflies, have a few food trees for, you don't have to feed animals. I do not agree on feeding animals, but because they are wild animals, they should be allowed to find their own food, but we can assist them by providing the kind of food plants in the garden so they can find their own food. And it's also nice, you will attract a lot of things into your garden, but you will also not attract everything that is good. You also attract some other pest also in the process, but that is life. I mean, you can't always have friendly animals in your garden. Some of them are going to annoy you a bit, like monkeys and all that, but you have to learn to tolerate a little bit of that, because that so to begin with, I think the first thing we can do is we can reduce the waste generation, wastewater generation. If we are releasing wastewater directly to a canal to have a trap, reduce our footprint. That is the first thing we have to be thinking about. Secondly, I think maybe we can work on our gardens and try to make them bio-friendly to attract more species. I think that's basically what you can do at home. And if you have more time, then you can get engaged in other additional work that are going on around the country.
Right, thank you so much, sir. We have actually come to the end of our session. So one final question for you. So now, since the 5th of June has been declared the World Environment Day, it made room for us to gather and talk about nature here today. But all the nature lovers who have gathered here will, I think, agree with me that we should not stick to one day alone to have such discussions or to take initiatives. So if nature provides for us and cares for us all the time, we should also do the same. So on an ending note, sir, do you have a final message for all of us here as a responsible nature lover?
I think I agree with what you said. Every day should be Nature Day, every day should be Biodiversity Day. But we need to have these kind of things so that we can make an additional effort to reach out, motivate people, look at positive stories, and because environmental conservation is a challenging task. You have more defeats than victories. That's also one thing I learned during my long career. But you should also have the strength to go on, irrespective of what defeats you get. You must always look at your victories and try to push on. So I would like to reverberate what you said. Every day should be, it should be part of our formula for life, that we pay attention to this. But I think celebrating once a year, I think the whole reason why UN introduced this is that we can focus on something, because sometimes people do things and because they still don't understand these links, not that they're bad people. So I think awareness is very important, because even if you can change the mindsets of few people at a time, over a long time, you make a huge difference. So that is the hope that we live in. That is why we do all these awarenesses. So my final message is, uh, this is the only planet we have. This is the only home we have. It's our duty to nurture it, look after it, protect it, for our own good and for the good of another 13 billion species that we share this planet with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that insightful advice. And that is all the questions we have received so far. So thank you so much again, sir, for being so patient and understanding in clarifying all of our queries. So that brings us to the end of today's session, and I think I'm speaking for everyone here when I say that we were most definitely inspired to make a change starting now for a better tomorrow. So on behalf of BEEZ, I would like to express our immense gratitude to you, sir, for taking time off your busy schedules to join us on Back to Nature's Way. Thank you so much, sir, for all the effort you put in order to make the session today a huge success. We hope you will also continue to support us in future programs as well, sir.
Thank you, Kanneliya. It's a pleasure for me to be with you all, and I will always consider it a pleasure to help you out any way I can.
Thank you so much, sir, once again. And our heartfelt gratitude goes to Professor Inoka Pereira also for always guiding us in doing our level best. So thank you so much, sir. And our utmost gratitude to all the academic staff members of our department and the university for joining with us today and gracing this event with your presence. We also would like to thank all members of the Institute of Biology Sri Lanka, Institute of Environmental Professionals Sri Lanka, members from Biodiversity Sri Lanka, all academics from other universities, as well as all professionals in the field of environment for their participation, because it added a greater significance to our event today. And last but not least, we're extremely grateful for all the participants today, since without you, this event would not have been a success. So we truly appreciate your enthusiasm and thank you all once again for joining with us on our path to making a change in the world. So we hope all of you will stay tuned with BEEZ for many more such programs. So stay safe, have a good evening. Thank you.